Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, as we welcome you back to Talk with Inayet Wadee on this Wednesday evening, as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media this evening. And we continue the discussion on the case that South Africa has brought at the International Court of Justice, the genocide case against the state of Israel. And we've seen since then a lot of debate, a lot of discussion that has been taking place, a lot of focus in terms of what will be the outcome of the ICJ genocide case against Israel. But there are many other questions that are being raised. I see even motives are being raised with regard to whether this is opportunism on the part of South Africa. What pushed South Africa to the ICJ case over Gaza? Do we see international actors right across the world lending their voices, lending the support to South Africa, which has been overwhelming? We've also seen countries like Germany supporting Israel over the ICJ case as well. But the key issue is what are some of the issues, and also we're going to try and unpack some of the critical issues with regards to the case, but also more importantly, just to look at how this entire genocide case against Israel is shaping up. And we joined by two legal brains this evening. We're joined by Yousha Tayob, Attorney Yousha Tayob, and also Advocate Aslam Bava, as we welcome both to the airwaves of Salam Media and to this broadcast this evening.
Inayet.
Right, top of the screen, I see Yousha Tayob, Attorney Yousha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Inayet, and to Aslam and the listeners.
Yes, and also to Advocate Aslam. Assalamu alaikum, welcome, and we appreciate your time with us this evening.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and to your listeners as well, Inayet.
Yes, Yousha, I think let's start off. Obviously, we've had now a few days to actually digest what has actually played out at the ICJ, at the hearing, looking at the South African case and also the case that was presented by the state of Israel. And I'm sure a lot of unpacking is being done, a lot of analysis is being done. And just before we get to some of the details, just to get first from you, Yousha, and then from Advocate Aslam, just to get an overview, just your thoughts on this case in itself.
Yeah, so Inayet, I hope we get slightly more intense on the Muslim perspective of this, but from a secular perspective, by and large, you have the Genocide Convention, and a number of countries are signatories to it, and it has a number of provisions that apply. And South Africa took the opportunity, and I have no doubt welcomed a position in referring what we see unfolding, unfortunately, in Gaza since the 7th of October to the ICJ on the basis of the Genocide Convention. I'm sure we'll have time to deal with the convention itself just now. But in essence, what the convention provides for is that member states can refer to the ICJ matters of this nature for resolution. And so that's exactly what it is. So it's unlike not unlike any other case in law that we practice with on a daily basis. You have a party who has been allegedly transgressed against, and they seek the relief of the intervention of a court, albeit on a much higher scale at this stage, because it's between nation states as opposed to individuals or other corporate entities. So it's a litigation not unlike any other litigation. It's a very specialist court that deals with a very specialized act.
Yes, Jazakallah for that. And Advocate Aslam, just hear your thoughts.
Yes, so this is, I think, a fundamental, well, rather, let's say, a groundbreaking case in the sense that we have had a transgressor in terms of the Genocide Convention, to which it is a signatory. And you will recall that this Genocide Convention came about around about the 9th of December in 1948, just after the Second World War. And Israel was one of the earlier signatories to the convention. South Africa became a signatory only in 1998. And between the states who are signatories to the Genocide Convention, they have an obligation to ensure that the other states who are signatories do not breach the provisions of the convention, do not commit genocide, and in any respect do not fall foul of the Genocide Convention. So it is the states that then declare a dispute with, in this case, South Africa declared a dispute with Israel. It does not have to be the country that is on the receiving end of the genocide. It simply has to be a signatory, and that deals with one of the aspects that they talk about relating to locus standi and jurisdiction from a legal perspective. So South Africa satisfied that. You will recall that against Myanmar, the Gambia brought the case, and the Gambia is a signatory, and so is Myanmar. And in that case too, Gambia was not the victim of the genocide. So it is very important, as you stated, Inayet. It has raised many questions. It has raised questions relating to how independent are the judges? Will the judges be able to adjudicate independently, or will there be political pressure that will come to bear on each judge to rule according to the country from which they originate? And these are some of the issues that arise in terms of the discussions.
Jazakallah for that, Advocate Aslam. And Yousha, just to get back to you. Now, one of the key issues here is trying to understand, and we know that this is unprecedented in more ways than one. And we already seeing certain, in fact, from some quarters, questions being raised in terms of intent. What has the South African government's intent been? Some have even gone as far as talking about the South African government being opportunistic over this, and what has actually pushed South Africa to the ICJ over Gaza. And this is coming under some scrutiny from certain quarters.
Inayet, yeah, a very difficult question. I mean, historically, South Africa, the present government of South Africa has always been aligned to the Eastern Bloc and the Russians, and for fairly obvious reasons. We know that the ANC of the past, pre-1994, and its military wing received training in many parts of the Eastern Bloc countries, in Russia, a lot of the Arab countries, hosted them, housed them, trained them, and so I think there's that allegiance to the Eastern Bloc. But I was party to a discussion, and I don't know how far to push this. I mean, I haven't investigated it extensively, but you'll recall that a short while ago, Putin was excluded from attending the BRICS summit in South Africa, and I wonder whether he had substantial influence in this referral because of the Cold War and whether we're being brought into it or not. Because it seems like a fairly double standard to me, and we've always had difficulty with these double standards, double foreign policies, double speak. But there was no noise from South Africa in the annihilation in Syria, in Afghanistan. I don't want to discredit what's being done now. I discredit it for other reasons. But insofar as that double standard is concerned, it's very worrisome to me. I don't know if they getting caught up in the emotion of Gaza. I don't know what Putin's influence in this has been. I don't even know if the South African legal application is an out for the Israelis because we know that they're seeing a lot of body bags. They're losing a lot of soldiers on the ground, and whether the application becomes an out for it, that they actually, I don't know if this is going to happen, but that they actually accept the ruling of the ICJ, which in my view should. I mean, it's a clear genocide. There's just these can't be judges of any worth if they rule otherwise. From what we're witnessing on social media and what we're seeing, there's a clear genocide. I mean, South Africa had a very easy case to establish, and from the defense that was put up by the Israelis, it was also clear they couldn't defend the indefensible. So I don't know that I can speak too much to intent or where it comes from, because if we want to claim the high moral ground, then we should be doing it on a fairly regular and a more substantial basis. So I can't speak to the intent. I must say the question surprised me. I wasn't ready for that kind of question. But speaking to intent is a very, very difficult thing, because I don't know that we hold moral superiority on any other issue. So I don't know if it's the morality, whether it's the opportunity to become a world player, whether it's Putin, whether it's an out for the Israelis. I think these are all debatable. But yeah, I don't know how much more to add there.
Well, Yousha, I think I think just in terms of intent, and I think from my reading into the situation, is possibly just looking at South Africa and the association we've had with Palestine over the years. Nelson Mandela, our strong association. So possibly, South Africa obviously identifying very, very strongly with the Palestinian cause, and also looking at our own history of apartheid. So possibly, when we talk about intent, that could possibly be. But irrespective of whether there has been
But
intent or not,
Inayet, no, I accept that, and maybe before you shift to Inayet, you see, the difficulty I have with reconciling this is that yes, he was a political statesman. Yes, he had to do what he had to do, but he never did anything about the Zionist Federation that continued to exist throughout his presidency. And that's a saddening approach, because he allowed it. Allowed it. My God, I'm creating words. Allowed an institution that represented apartheid to continue to exist in this country. And for me, that's a double standard again. At some point in this discussion, we've got to get to the standards that Muslims hold themselves to, and others. So I'm concerned, Inayet. I'm concerned that you say that. I accept that they were trained in Russia, and a number of MK cadres are buried in Russia, and they had that support, and they had the support of the Palestinians, and they had the support of Castro and the Cubans, and the Venezuelans. They've had all that support, but we've seen major things happen. For instance, in Cuba, in Venezuela. Where was South Africa then? What about the regime change, the double? Many years ago, around the 2010 World Cup, a number of our brothers were parties to a meeting where one of the Pahad brothers indicated to them clearly, and they were talking about the potential terrorism threat in South Africa on account of the World Cup being hosted here. And his words to these people, and I heard it from several people who attended, was, when America says jump, we ask how high. And that was Isu Pahad in his heyday. So I don't know that I can speak to intent, because I'm seeing completely conflicting representations here. Where was the outcry when Assad was using chemical warfare in Syria? Was that not a genocide against the non-Assad supporters? Why the double? We start our lives, we come out of the wombs, we grow up in homes where we are taught about U.S. foreign policy and the dual foreign policy for not so white people, and not so and not the same for Muslim people. That double standard doesn't exist in our deen. We're not. I mean, the level of justice in the deen is do justice even if it be against your own self. That is the Quran. That is the level. So it's very difficult to discuss intent. I see a video of Palestinians standing in the streets and saying, "Thank you, South Africa," and I don't know how to feel about it. Because we've had numerous debates, and I'm not sure if I've debated it with you before, but this concept of lawfare. What do we do? Do we use the tools that we have? Surely we are held to a substantially higher standard by Allah. And are these actions and applications? Because and we've discussed this before on a show that you had. Since 2008, we've been referring to dockets regarding Gaza. Operation Castlet, 2009, 2008. We lodged a docket with this very NPA. They refused to prosecute it. And then we had the litigation center for the Zimbabweans, who were exactly in terms of the same statute, the Rome Statute, brought an application, and the court ruled in favor of the applicant, saying the South African police have a duty to investigate. But they declined the 2009 and we all saw what happened in Castlet. There was social media. There was not as extensive as it is now, but there was everything that showed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Yet they didn't act. We renewed that application. Every time there was a raid in Gaza, we renewed that application, including the most recent violation at Al-Aqsa Masjid. Our NPA doesn't move. And let me tell you an interesting story. When we lodged the 2008-2009 docket, we had to deal with the outgoing white senior advocates. And you know, one of the first questions he asked us in that meeting, when we went to deliver the docket requesting a prosecution of Israel, he said, "What about prosecuting Hamas?" And the beautiful answer was, "Please go ahead. If you have evidence against Hamas, prosecute them. Prosecute them in terms of this act. But do it on the same standard that you prosecute Israel." And that's all we asked. Yet nothing happened until 2023. So I'm sorry, life's made me a skeptic. But it doesn't seem real to
Yes,
me.
Yousha, in
I
fact,
mean,
I just want Advocate Aslam's take on some of the issues that you've raised, particularly with regard to standards, and also looking at the whole question surrounding intent. And I know, Yousha, obviously, we appreciate what you've just said, and we know we've seen the duplicity, we've seen it in the past. You refer back to 2010 as well. I'm fully aware of what you are trying to say, but just to get Advocate Aslam's take on some of the issues that you've raised.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm firmly of the view that what South Africa has done is a phenomenal piece of work. When you do something good, and when you are subject to certain, it doesn't matter how bad you have performed in other areas. If you are doing something good, you don't douse the good aspect by saying, "But look what you're doing on the other end, it's bad." So if a person goes and does a good deed of charity, you don't say, "But you know what? You do other bad deeds." That's not the way one should approach this, from my view. And I think what has happened is our history has given us a set of individuals that are prepared to take on and bravely stand against the world. And to me, that is a phenomenal stance which we must support completely. What they have done is, we know that at the risk of South Africa facing a backlash from the United States, from Israel, from the European countries, it has bravely marched on and taken on the rights of the oppressed. However we want to look at it, this is an area of engagement that has put Israel and America and NATO under so much pressure in terms of being accountable. Israel stands in violation of over 66 or 67 United Nations resolutions. It has never, ever seen itself being accountable or in fact found it necessary for it to present any case to the United Nations at all. You recall in 2010 as well that the ICJ made a ruling against Israel regarding the apartheid wall. And this is a fundamental shift. For us to even try and think of underplaying it or criticizing it or being hypercritical of a stance that is so boldly taken with so much enthusiasm for the oppressed. And I think that comes through from our history, where we have experienced this. And that has created a moral fiber among some people. We may not agree with everyone, but a moral fiber. I'm not skeptical about this in the least. I do not believe it's an Eastern Bloc issue. I do not believe, although we have now a multipolarity as far as geopolitics is concerned. To me, the issue is fundamentally the South Africa saw that there was a violation of the Geneva Convention, of the Genocide Convention, that Israel was committing genocide at such a scale. Everybody, including all the Arab states, Turkey, all of the countries, none of them took a stance. All of them were following a certain tune, and it took South Africa. The shift in polarity of the step that South Africa took by referring the matter to the ICJ as far as a dispute, knocked Israel out, knocked America out, and we saw the White House commenting and saying that they believed that South Africa's case was useless. We saw multiple attacks against South Africa, and I think it was very well done. In fact, we should be very proud as South Africans that this step was taken, that it has dislodged to a great extent Israel's invincibility and Israel's lack of cooperation, although Netanyahu has now indicated that even if the ICJ rules against Israel, Israel will not comply. So to my mind, it is a phenomenal step. We should support it to the hilt. We should ensure that this step and bold step that has been taken by South Africa is worthy of praise and worthy of protection.
Yes, shukran for that. Yousha, just to bring you back into the discussion. Now, I've read quite an interesting take on this case at the ICJ, and the opinion that has been expressed here is this is not only about Israel on trial, because when one looks at the ICJ, we're looking at a legal battle, but at the same time, there are political consequences as well, where South Africa is testing the West's claim to moral superiority. And I just need your thoughts, because saying, this is not only about Israel, because we've seen an entire world, we've seen morally, we've seen how the world has actually reacted to the crisis. We've seen the support to Israel, particularly coming from the likes of the West, from the United States, from the UK, Germany, standing with Israel as far as the ICJ is concerned. So just looking at this whole claim about moral superiority and how this is likely to test the world politically.
Yeah, I think that author is spot on. That author is completely spot on. I mean, it's revealed to these countries and its own populations and the world how morally depraved they really are. I mean, but we've been screaming this for 100 years now. It's a double standard. It's a world completely absorbed with itself. So yeah, insofar as this has opened people's eyes, it definitely has, and it's really back to the bush. You are either with us or you're against us, and they're clearly showing who's against us. So yeah, I think that the opinion that you refer to is absolutely spot on. It's a serious exposure. Yeah,
definitely. Advocate Aslam, you were going to say something?
Yes. So that article is very interesting. Since the invasion of Iraq that we have seen, the United States and NATO have abused the processes of the United Nations and the Security Council, and they have regarded themselves as above the law. So fundamentally, all the parties had decided that, look, we will be part of the United Nations. Its predecessor was the League of Nations. But we, as members of the United Nations, will agree to abide by certain rules and certain laws. And when it came to the 1991 invasion, when they invaded Iraq and then went on to Afghanistan, and then even went on to Syria, we noticed that the Western powers, NATO, was not accountable to anybody. It decided that whatever it wanted to do, it did. So the rule of law did not apply to the colonizing countries, but it applied to the colonized. And so when they wanted to whip out any legislation of the United Nations or any rules, they took it and they said it will apply against you. So, for example, what they did in Kuwait, and what that Kuwait owed them money, and what they did in Iraq in stealing the oil, they said, by your invitation, we came in, we brought democracy, and for that, you owe us money, and for that, they continuously stole oil. So, this turn in South Africa, I mean, history is going to remember what South Africa has done here. It has turned the tide. You know, irrespective of how we look at it, in terms of what the motive is, and my sense is, I've told you, I believe that the motive is very good. It's fundamentally important. I believe that what this has dislodged is the element that countries can operate with impunity, and that they will not be brought to book. And this is the first time that Israel has responded and sent representatives to defend it in court. Now, this is very, very important, because previously Israel said, we'll just rely on the United States veto and nothing will come of it. Now the implications are not only for Israel. The implications for Israel, they're the implications for NATO, they're the implications for the UK. So all of this is now, I think, has created a ground where at least the oppressed people of the world can see that there is some sense of, well, there's a silver lining and a potential of challenging the powers of these superpowers.
Yes, Yousha, let's just get back to the case in itself. And I'm sure, you've followed and you've read, in fact, in detail what this case has been all about. And just, taking a look at the case in itself, South Africa, obviously South Africa being applauded right across the entire world, and even the legal team that was chosen, many saying that we couldn't have chosen a better legal team to represent South Africa at this case. And just to get, just to understand some of the key issues surrounding the case in itself and the case for genocide.
Yeah, so look, I mean, in essence, just by the way, we also used both John Dugard and Max du Plessis in all our dockets that we submitted on Gaza. So the Max du Plessis and John Dugard were instrumental in those dockets as well. So I don't know how much detail you want to go through. I mean, this is an 84-odd page document. A lot of the commencing comments relate to compliance with the Geneva Convention, as you're obliged to do in defining who the parties are, pleading out the standing of the parties and why they're entitled to be in the court, why the court has a particular jurisdiction. But the bulk of the 84 pages then go into detail all of the evidence that they have been able to collect, particularly since the 7th of October, and they collected evidence pre-7th of October to establish the intent portion of committing genocide. And they outlined in quite extensive detail comments made that were genocidal by nature, and they argued that as well. They then detailed the extent of the crimes being committed and equated them to the genocide in accordance with the intent. So that's, it was a natural follow through who the parties are, why the court has jurisdiction, compliance with the code, the code attached to the convention, and then they set out the crimes of genocide as they saw them, and how there could be no other reading other than a genocide. And then they showed all the continuous destruction, and then they gave details which they had received of the number of people killed, the number of families, the number of communities annihilated, and they showed the indiscriminate bombing and all of those aspects. So that in essence was the case. of the 84 pages. Insofar as the relief that was then claimed, they then said, look, we accept that some of the allegations we make may still need to be investigated and verified, but by and large, we say to you that we've been able to establish that the crime of genocide is being committed, and we ask you to implement a temporary measure at this stage to force Israel to stop its genocide, and you continue with the investigation, and you come back with the final relief that we claim. And obviously, it will go to a second stage of argument because this was just a preliminary to try and get a ceasefire of sorts on the continued destruction in Gaza.
Yes, Jazakallah. And also, Advocate Aslam, when one looks at the disconnect between reality and the claims that Israel had actually made in its case at the ICJ, and even to the extent, all the lies that obviously that surfaced during the presentations, many of which were actually debunked already. And yet, we've seen all these lies surfacing when Israel had presented its case. But more importantly, just looking at the reaction of Israel, again, crying foul, crying anti-Semitic, accusing the South Africa of being the legal arm for Hamas. Now, all these allegations and accusations are starting to actually surface as well. Once again, I suppose, to get world opinion on their side, but also I think, Israel knows that it is up against a very, very strong case that South Africa had presented.
Yes, you're correct, Inayet. Just looking at the case itself, what South Africa had decided as a tactic, and which was also used in the Myanmar case, was fundamentally this, that we cannot prove genocide at this stage because that requires an investigation. But what we do believe is that there's an ongoing genocide which appears to be genocidal. And so we're asking the ICJ to give an interim order, as it were. In South Africa, we would know it as an interim order, but on an urgent basis, pending the determination as to whether it actually constitutes genocide. And in that respect, South Africa had to present simply a prima facie case. And again, here, I think we need to congratulate the South African team. The legal team did exceedingly well. It presented a fantastic case on paper, and it was well presented. It was one to be proud of, as lawyers, definitely to see that. And the point that you raise, Inayet, is what did Israel come as far as its response is concerned? Israel simply started its tropes and its accusations. In fact, it has called anybody who has defended the Palestinians to be part of Hamas. You will realize that recently, when Turkey has accused it, it is now called Turkey an arm of Hamas. So what Israel's defense was a very bankrupted defense. We could see it was, firstly, from a legal perspective, one would, I particularly saw, and many people have commented, that Israel wasn't as prepared as the South African team in terms of its presentation of the case. It also did not have an answer to genocide. In fact, just let's take one particular aspect which was raised in one critical article, which said that in Israel's defense, they started talking about the fact that Israel had given a 3-week warning before it went into the ground attack. And it said, as a result of that, it cannot be genocidal because for 3 weeks they were under warning. But they leave out a fundamental aspect, that in those 3 weeks there was bombing by planes, and that is genocidal. So the Israeli defense was very weak. Standing out on a legal terrace, I would say that if it is judged just legally, South Africa stands a pretty good chance of succeeding if politics doesn't come in the way.
Yes, you should just to understand now, obviously for people like us, lay people that don't understand, how the law works, how international law works, how the a mechanism like the International Court of Justice actually works, because we are talking about obviously an immediate ruling in terms of the interim measures that South Africa has actually asked for, but also taking a look at a case like this, taking years and years and years just to understand how the ICJ works. Why would it take years when, to an ordinary person like myself, it's open, it's blatant, the evidence is there?
Due process. I don't know how else to put it to you. In our profession, it's called due process. I mean, even locally, if I were to tell you that it would take 2 years for a high court matter to come to trial, uh, that's the reality. 12 months for 8 to 12 months. It's due process, Inayet. But I want to go back to just two aspects that you touched on, which I think Aslam hadn't answered. And I must remind Aslam that from the university days, Aslam is a professional on anti-Semitism. Because I remember I'm much younger than Aslam is. Might not look it, but um, we are also Semites. We are also the descendants of Semites. So that argument, and maybe Aslam can restate what he said to me 20, 25, 30 years ago. Uh, that anti-Semitic argument just doesn't make sense because we're also Semites, and Aslam has a lot more detail. I remember as a first-year university student learning that from him. So I think he can lend a lot of credence to that argument if he remembers it. But he certainly knows a lot more. And then the second one that I wanted him to address was loses me. But it's called due process. I mean, this is a court like Aslam said to you. It was the predecessor was the League of Nations, and then they decided that they needed a structure that could adjudicate its disputes between member states. We know how biased that has been over the years. We know how power and money control the UN. It's not an independent, it can't be independent. It has to have a bias. It's got to be funded, and we know who its funders are, and it has a specific bias in favor of the US. You'll recall that some months ago, an ICC prosecutor who threatened to investigate, and this is the International Criminal Court, not the ICJ, it's a different court established in terms of the Rome Statute to criminal actions, and which by and large has only prosecuted non-white people thus far. A prosecutor who indicated that there would be an investigation regarding Palestine was immediately black or red or yellow or purple listed by the US and the entire legal team, and they were prohibited from traveling. So, these structures exist because we want to create this realm of independence and free world and democracy and justice, and so these institutions exist, but they don't do what they're supposed to do. And insofar as what they do is concerned, is that like any other court, they have what is called due process. You can initiate a process by completing the prescribed documentation, and they will eventually allocate a court and a hearing date and all of those. And some of the times they will take the normal course of whatever the normal course would be. And it has a procedure for urgent relief as well. And we've got to exchange documents, or you've got to exchange whatever it is. So it's the simple answer to your question is due process. But I'm really keen for you to hear Aslam on anti-Semitism, because I remember it from 25 years ago, Aslam. I don't remember the detail, but I remember it from about 25 years ago on Upper's table in the back section. So this whole argument of none of the Jewish arguments make any sense. None of them. They just useless. A bunch of useless people. But anyway, so but this anti-Semite argument, and I asked him to break it down if he remembers. I don't know if he has those notes in front of him, but he'll break that down for you quite quickly. For we are also Semites. The Ishmaelites.
Well, I'm sure Edward, we've got some mental notes.
Yeah, so But just to address this first issue of due process, so Inayet, why it takes many years is the parties have to build up the evidentiary basis in terms of documents, in terms of videos, and the opposite party has the right to question it. So I could come up with a video that I've made up and present it in front of you, in front of the court, and the court has to be satisfied at the end of the day that this is what we term admissible evidence, that that video is actually correct, and there are various processes or documents that are produced or witnesses that come in and produce evidence. So all of that takes preparation, and it also requires time for it to be heard. Yousha, I'm going to argue that I'm going to answer the Semite issue, but I just wanted to get the viewers to get a sense as to why these courts and what constitutes due process is that the parties must be allowed to present their full cases before the tribunal in this case, and in order to do that, there are various aspects of evidence and evidentiary aspects that have to be surfaced before the court so that it can consider and ultimately make a ruling. As far as Semites, yes, it's a very interesting history. There is Abdullah Franji, who's written a very nice book called The PLO and Palestine. And then there have been various different books. If you go back right to the history of the Bible, the Canaanites were the occupiers of the land. And subsequent to that, they're talking about, for example, that the Israelites and the Hebrews were part of Judea and Samaria and Kingdom of Israel. But the question that one needs to ask is that if you look at the historical aspect, is Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam and then his children, Ham, Shem, and Yafve, and the three children, and coming from that, not only do we then fall within the same structure in terms of genealogy, but many of the Jewish people who then lived in Palestine when it became Palestine thereafter, and that is many centuries ago, lots of the Jewish people also converted to Islam and to Christianity. So the Palestinians as well themselves are descendants from these people as well. So as far as the genealogical structure, I mean, there's a whole argument about the genealogy of the Palestinians and the genealogy of the Ashkenazi Jews, particularly coming from and the Turkic descent. They may not even be Semites, but that is at a different level of genealogy. I think we just need to stick at this stage at looking at the case and the prospects of what's going to turn out at the ICJ, as far as this case is concerned and how it's going to unfold.
Yes, Advocate Aslam, just in your mind, how do you think this is likely to unfold?
Yes, so if it's held strictly in terms of the law, I think South Africa should win. If there is South Africa needs 8 judges to rule in its favor of the 15 judges. There were 2 additional ad hoc judges, one from South Africa and one from Israel, that were allowed to be ad hoc judges. So it's going to require 8 judges to rule in favor of South Africa. Various different commentators have put different permutations and counting as to which countries are going to, which judges are going to vote or rule in a particular manner. If the judges follow what they ought to as judges and law, and if they hold the rule of law to be paramount, and if they believe that the integrity of the ICJ needs to be protected, because remember, these judges are going to be changing in February. These 15 judges are coming to the end of their 9-year term. And after every 9 years, a new set of 15 judges are then appointed. So if they're upholding the ICJ and they're upholding the integrity of the ICJ and their rule in terms of the law, then hands down, I think South Africa should succeed. This is the view of Professor Francis Boyle as well. But if politics plays its part, which I have no doubt it will, then it's debatable. I mean, some are putting the count as 4 judges in favor of South Africa. Some are putting it as 6 or 7. One person put it at 6.5. So, but the importance is that should the ruling, and we pray that the ruling goes in South Africa's favor, it puts tremendous pressure on NATO. It puts tremendous pressure on the United States, Germany, the UK for supplying arms, because they have aided and abetted in this genocidal conduct of Israel. So it's going to have huge implications, and that's what we're seeing these countries wanting to ensure that South Africa does not succeed. So that's what stands up. I mean, obviously the implications if South Africa doesn't succeed, then there's a political advantage for the NATO and the West. The point as well is whether Israel will comply. You already see Netanyahu saying he's not going to comply, and what happens with the ruling at that stage. The ruling for enforcement then has to be taken to the Security Council. The Security Council, the US has got a veto there, and it's going to exercise its veto. And then in terms of the Convention for Peace, South Africa can then take it to the General Assembly. And at the General Assembly, it can ask for certain relief against Israel, including ensuring that Israel does not participate in the United Nations, that sanctions be imposed, that Palestine becomes a member state. Currently it's like Switzerland. It's what do you call it? Observer status. It has, yes, thank you. It has observer status, and it could become a member. Those sanctions of actually removing Israel's participation was done with South Africa when South Africa, in terms of its apartheid policies, was excluded. So those aspects could become, very vital to the functioning of the UN as it goes forward.
Yes, Yousha, from what Advocate Aslam has just described, the fact that this actually becomes a numbers game, and how critical, how crucial is this, where judges driven by political motivations can actually vote. Just looking at it from a legal point of view, and also when we talk about the credibility, or whether we talk about the integrity of an institution like the ICJ, what does this tell us when it becomes a numbers game?
I think the answer is in your question. I mean, it loses complete credibility, doesn't it? It loses complete credibility. I mean, earlier when Aslam was talking and we were talking about due process and presentation of evidence, I don't know how much more evidence we need. What we've seen on social media and what's been posted is, we're going to wait for the UN Commission on Human Rights and Human Rights Watch and other organizations that will bring out reports in 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years' time detailing the atrocities. We've seen it happen time and again. The Boers of this country will talk about how they were persecuted. The African people of this country will talk about how they were and eventually justice prevails. Freedom came. I mean, I'm not so sure that some of the fights were legitimate, but certainly we had a fight against apartheid, and that ended. Whether economic apartheid has ended or not is a different issue, but the racial segregation, and somebody pays the price. Then you have the TRC, and all the truth comes out. and it's happening the world over. So it's a very, very sad day. It's a very, very sad day that political commentators have to step in and talk about interests other than justice that will influence the outcome of this decision. It's a really sad day. It's a really sad day.
Yes, I think we've got about 3 minutes to go. Just some final thoughts from yourself, Advocate Aslam, just looking ahead and what can be expected over the next few days. And obviously, you, as much as everyone else, looking forward to the outcome.
Yes, I think that the outcome will come fairly soon, within the next few weeks. It's brought by South Africa on an urgent basis to address the issue of the continued bombing. And once the ruling is given and there's sufficient pressure where the countries who are supporting this genocide realize that they, are under the spotlight, it will force them to step back. We're already seeing some of that playing out in Gaza, where the Israeli troops are withdrawing, but it's a combined effect. I mean, the Palestinian resistance has been phenomenal, and that is causing them to withdraw, as well as potential pressure. If you recall, they said to the United States that they will pull out in the first few weeks of January, and it's happening. But I think it's a combined effect. So we're all looking forward to this ruling, and hoping that it will be a positive one.
Jazakallah. Yousha, just final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I'm not as positive as Aslam is about the consequences of the outcome, whether positive or negative. I simply, and go back to your comment about being morally depraved. I just don't think it matters to them. They'll do a deal on the side here, there, and everywhere else, as they've done for the last 100 years. And it means nothing. I mean, if the decision is influenced by politics, the outcome is going to be influenced by politics, and ultimately it's Muslims who suffer. So I'm not as I'm hoping that if the outcome is positive and the consequences were going to be real, which I don't think they're going to be, because the outcome is not going to be real, because it's influenced by politics. Its consequences are influenced by politics. It's politics all over again. Sorry, skeptic.
Jazakallah khairan for that, to Attorney Yousha Tayob, and also to you, Advocate Aslam Bava. We thank you. We say Jazakallah to both of you for your time with us this evening right here on Salam Media. All the best to both of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Inayet, before you go, I got a link for a second hour. Is it cancelled? I don't have to be there. There's something about a second hour.
No. It's this is it, Yousha. This is it.
Okay, yeah, thank you, man. I was waiting. Be shut till 10 o'clock. I thought there was a second link, because I got two links. So okay. Thank you very much.
I think the link was for the earlier show. In fact, I think they possibly just sent it to you in error. Okay.
No. I was just a bit concerned that 2 hours, was long. Okay, Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
problem.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition, Talk with Inayet Wadee, tonight on Salam Media, as we unpack some of the issues in the build-up to the much anticipated decision or the vote, I would say, by the judges at the International Court of Justice, what to expect, what not to expect. And let's just wait and see what actually pans out. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. It's been an absolute pleasure being in your company once again. So from myself and the team here at Salam Media, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.